laptop and my cell phone have a 2-minute dispersion. And honest to God, I think it's a rounding error. I think one of them goes up a minute and one of them goes down a minute. So I never start talking until my laptop says 2 or 3 minutes after. But here we are at 2:04 on my laptop. I'm going to start. I've started recording already.
Yeah, I hit that for
must
you.
have grabbed that for me. With no further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today, Dan Cannon. He gave us his title and his bio and his abstract, but I can tell you that he described to me moments ago that it's dumping in Alaska and he wants to go skiing when the seminar is over with, and it will be his 50th day on the slopes this year. So he has a wonderful spirit of adventure, and I know that the faculty all have warm memories of Dan and his cohort of very energetic young scientists. And he's had an illustrious career working with non-governmental organizations since he left the Rock. So we're really totally stoked to have Dan with us. And go ahead and tell us your stories, Dan.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully I can do this successfully. Can you see the first slide? Great. So hi, everyone, and thanks to Dr. B for reaching out and inviting me to present. Thanks to all the students for attending, as I realize today is St. Patrick's Day, and this might not be your #1 priority. I'm really honored to be speaking to GGE today. It's nice to see familiar faces. My time at Slippery Rock and in the department has been a huge influence on who I've become today and why I do what I do. As you can see, my name is Dan Cannon. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I work for the Alaska Conservation Foundation, and I'm based in Juneau, Alaska. Most of Southeast Alaska is Tlingit land, and specifically Juneau is on the traditional territory of the Akwon and Takuquan clans. So I'm going to try and wrap up in the next 35 minutes, so there will be some time for questions. That said, please don't hesitate to ask questions during the presentation. And afterwards, please feel free to reach out, call or email me at any time.
I'll monitor the chat box, Dan, and with the cadence of your speech, you concentrate on your presentation, and occasionally I may let you know that there are questions.
Great, sounds good. So today I want to talk briefly about how my time at Slippery Rock helped shape my career path, some examples of advocacy that I've been involved in, discuss a day in the life of an advocate in terms of the Tongass roadless rule protections. And finally, I'd like to end with just some tips and resources for folks interested in potentially pursuing a career in environmental advocacy. So lots of fun pictures here. My career path obviously starts with my time at Slippery Rock. I would say the Geography, Geology, and Environment department was influential because of the intentional community that is built within the department. As Dr. B often says, get in the van. It's true. There are many classes and many more experiences outside the classroom I can point to that helped prepare me for the work I do today. So my junior year, Geography, Geology, and Environment students got involved in a campaign called Leave It Green. This campaign on campus called to protect the campus campground from being paved into a parking lot. Later that summer, I did research with Dr. Wong, which we looked at longleaf pine forest fragmentation in the Red Hills region of Florida and Georgia. And this experience showed me the importance of land conservation for ecological purposes. My senior year, when I could find him, Dr. Livingston let the GGE club use some department funding to attend a youth climate change conference in Washington, D.C. called Power Shift. At Power Shift is where I really learned about the impact you can have when you organize people to call for political change. So after the conference, GGE students wanted to design and pull together a campaign on campus. And considering his experience and involvement with bringing wolves back to Yellowstone, Lang actually gave us a lot of advice on designing that campaign. So we designed a campaign called the Green Fund. And what we did was we petitioned and forced the Student Government Association to hold a referendum vote. And in that vote, we asked students to pay $5 a semester to raise roughly $80,000 a year. And that money would be used to fund sustainability projects on campus. When the vote took place, 85% of the students voted in favor of the Green Fund. Now, I'm not sure if Dr. Wong is still doing research in the Red Hills region, or if Dr. Livingston is still hard to find and giving the GGE Club department funds to attend political conference. I'm not sure if the campus campground is still there, or if the Green Fund is still a thing. But it was these experiences outside the classroom that made me choose a career in environmental advocacy. Now, obviously, the knowledge I learned inside the classroom was also crucial for the work I do today. But I really want to encourage folks to yes, get in that van, really embrace experiences outside the classroom, whether it be research or the many field trips GGE professors take you on. So, well, why politics and advocacy? So as much as you may dislike politics, it's hard to imagine how any aspect of our lives isn't impacted by local, state, federal, or even international policy. So when we think about wanting to create positive change for the environment, we often look towards our own personal lifestyles first. You know, I can use this light bulb, or I can use that light bulb. I can bike to work, or I can drive my car. And personal changes are great, and we should strive to make lifestyle choices that benefit the general public and the planet. That said, when it comes to solving problems such as the climate crisis, we can't do it with individual change. In other words, society can't vegan our way out of the climate crisis. Now, I'm not saying that going vegan is not better for the planet, but asking the world's population to go vegan to solve the climate crisis is a bit unrealistic. So instead, we need to look at the true root of the problem systematically and work to identify solutions or policies that will create lasting change, systems change. We want this change to influence the way our society or institutions function. So we might not be able to vegan our way out of the climate change impacts from the agricultural industry, but we can create policies that incentivize farms that don't use petroleum-based pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, or pass laws that mandate farms use holistic pasture-based livestock management to help reduce methane emissions from cows. So there are many different types of organizations, and most often they are nonprofit organizations, but not all focus on changing systems. Some focus on direct services, self-help, and education. So I focus my career on working for advocacy organizations that really focus on system change through elections, legal action, organizing communities, mobilizing mass protest, and committing civil disobedience. These groups most often rely on people power to build political or corporate pressure to invoke specific policies. So organizations have power because they represent voters, because they represent purchasing power, because they represent the general public opinion, or they represent facts and science. You know, and the classic example that I think a lot of people look towards is the Sierra Club. And here you can see they're not shy, talking about how they rely on people power to really drive a healthy world. So I wanted to give 3 personal examples from my career to show how I have built people power. So first, you know, I'm curious, who has voted? You can raise your hand or use the emojis. Okay, great. So folks have voted. That's a great first step. Welcome to democracy, everyone. Who has registered voters before? Has anyone registered voters? Okay, so I see someone's registered a voter. Great. And then does anyone know what GOTV stands for? Okay, GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote. So upon graduating, I received a year-long paid fellowship with Green Corps, the Field School for Environmental Organizing. Green Corps is like graduate school for activists. You get 7 weeks of classroom training, and you're partnered with 3 to 4 organizations to work on campaigns in communities across the country. So I worked for organizations in Texas, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. My first campaign with Green Corps was Power Vote. This was through the National Wildlife Federation in partnership with Energy Action Coalition, which is now called Power Shift Network. And Energy Action Coalition is actually the organization that put on that political conference I attended while at Slippery Rock's Power Shift. So because National Wildlife Federation and Energy Action Coalition had a specific tax status, we weren't able to campaign for a specific candidate. Instead, we did voter education. So we asked potential voters, and we were targeting youth voters on college campuses. We asked voters if they were registered to vote, and if they weren't, we would give them the information on how to get registered and the timelines on when they needed to register. And if we were able to, we would register them. Different states have different rules and processes for registering voters, so it depended which state you were in, if you were registering voters or not. Then we would talk to them about why it was important to elect candidates who cared about addressing climate change and shifting to a clean energy future with green jobs. So we would take down their contact information, and we would then follow up with them when voting began to ask them to turn out to vote. And that's where GOTV, Get Out the Vote, really comes in. So just because people are registered doesn't mean they're actually going to the polls and voting. You really have to, they say the average voter needs to be reminded 3 to 5 times to actually go and vote. So I traveled across the state of Texas, engaging more than 5,000 young people in 2008. And this was part of a much larger campaign across the entire country. In the end, the Power Vote campaign in 2008 engaged over 500,000 young people, encouraging them to vote. So this really helped with youth voter turnout in 2008, the Power Vote campaign. And on the site, you'll see 2 images from Florida. I actually ran the Power Vote campaign in Florida for the 2010 midterm elections. The 2010 midterm elections did not turn out as well as the 2008 general election, but that's neither here or there. So another example that I want to talk about is mobilization and how we use digital tools to mobilize people to take action. So along with turning out voters, advocacy groups work to right a wrong and bring people together who are concerned about that same wrong. So when people think of mobilizations, they often think about the standard protest, rally, or march. And today, advocacy groups use a slew of digital tools, communication apps, databases, social media platforms to really activate the public and organize mobilization efforts around issues. So when President Trump first took office in 2016, he had nominated a slew of climate change deniers for top posts at various agencies. At the time, I was working with Greenpeace USA, and we were specifically concerned about the former CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, being nominated as the Secretary of State. So we built a coalition, which means we partnered with other groups to do a large day of action. And that day of action was called the Day Against Denial. And Greenpeace really focused on Rex Tillerson. So our hashtag that we used that day was Reject Rex. But together, the groups used digital tools to not only educate our supporters and the general public, but ask them to hold rallies and lobby at their senators' offices across the country. The goal was to ask their senators to vote against Trump's nominations. We also used digital communication applications to drive in thousands of phone calls to senators' offices. So we actually had digital tools where we could send a text message. Our supporters could click a link and they would immediately be connected via phone with their senator, depending on their location. So additionally, organizations will use movement moments to drive active participation. So Greenpeace, what we did was we live streamed some key moments of escalation. For example, we disrupted Rex Tillerson's Senate hearing. And while we were disrupting the Senate hearing, we were using Facebook to live stream that event and encouraging folks to drive phone calls into their senators to remind them to vote against Rex Tillerson's nomination. We also used a group of veterans. We partnered with Iraq Veterans Against the War. They did a stand-in at the late Senator John McCain's office, and we live streamed this event. These moments also help drive news and generate media. And it helps generate just excitement and more participation in general education for the general public. You know, not all efforts are successful, and sometimes the principles of participating in democracy, raising concern, and engaging with your elected officials is the small but important win. So in this case, the climate deniers, including Rex Tillerson, were confirmed. So you don't win them all, and that's okay. I think the important part is really understanding and participating in democracy. So the third example I want to give is civil disobedience. You know, not all laws are just, and sometimes environmental advocacy groups commit civil disobedience, purposely breaking those laws to bring attention to injustice. So I wanted to talk about the birth of the modern day environmental justice movement. So many folks actually point to a 6-week-long civil disobedience campaign in terms of the environmental justice movement being born. In 1982, when the state government of North Carolina decided Warren County would make a perfect home for 6,000 truckloads of soil laced with toxic PCBs, community members decided to block the delivery toxic PCB waste to the landfill. And this was in the community of Afton, North Carolina. So in the end, over 500 community members were arrested. And ultimately, unfortunately, the community lost that battle. And as you can probably guess, you know, this being the birth of the environmental justice movement, Warren County and the town of Afton was poor, rural, and overwhelmingly Black. And we see this disproportionately, the impacts of climate change and the impacts of pollution are really BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are really targeted, often purposely, by governments and corporations. And so the science shows that the impacts are much greater in those communities. So today, environmental advocacy organizations still use civil disobedience. In 2011, many organizations got involved in encouraging their supporters to come to Washington, D.C. to sit in at the White House to raise awareness about the Keystone XL pipeline. Over 1,200 people were arrested over a 2-week period. This was by no means the start of the resistance to the pipeline, as Indigenous communities had already been fighting the pipeline for years before. But the action of getting arrested in front of the White House really escalated the issue, helped gain international and national attention, and built the pressure on the Obama administration to really take action on this specific issue. The same goes for drilling in the Arctic. In 2015, organizations came together to pressure Shell Oil and the Obama administration to abandon its Arctic drilling plans. The organizations used hundreds of kayaks to build a strong David versus Goliath visual, as you can see in this photo. The campaign eventually led to activists rappelling from a bridge in Portland to stop one of Shell's ships with drilling equipment from heading north to Alaska. These actions resulted again in international attention and putting a lot of political pressure on the Obama administration to act. So now I want to kind of talk briefly about the day and what it's like to work in advocacy. But before that, I want to show a video for just to kind of give some context before I kind of dive into a day-to-day. So I'm going to share my screen, but this time I'm going to do advanced so the video actually works. Let's see.
There's a box in the lower left of the share that pumps the audio in.
Yep. So now I'm going to do this. And just let me know if you can hear this.
For those of us who live in Alaska, the concept of backyard is bigger than other places.
I can hear it, Dan, but I can't see it.
Okay, let me fix that.
I could only hear it lightly.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Yes, okay. Now we should be good.
I can see your shared screen. I can see the video on the roadless rule.
Okay. Did I lose the link? Here we go. Okay, and I'll turn this up. Okay.
Screen is frozen right now. I see the play button for the explained.
Okay, ready?
Ready. Still no video.
Okay, we're gonna do this, and I'm gonna share it in the comment, and I'll ask folks to watch it on their screens.
Okay, very good. We can extract that link and email to people too, to follow up.
Okay, so it's a YouTube clip, and I just shared the link in the chat, so everyone should have it. And it's 3 minutes long, so everyone can take 3 minutes to watch it, and I'll come back at 8:25, or sorry, 12:25 for you all.
Actually, Dan, I got it in the queue. If I do a screen share, I should be able to do this. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's see. Got to skip this ad in a second.
I don't think that's the video.
It's not, huh? Okay. I'm going to stop the share. Regrets. We gave it the old college try, but I got to.
Sometimes I think it's best if just folks watch it real quick on their own.
Okay. Dan is asking everybody to go and watch the video for a few minutes. I just successfully watched it, Dan.
Okay, great. Then I'll assume most folks have watched it, and I'll share my screen again. So that hopefully gives folks a little context around the Wilderness Rule and a little bit more information about Southeast Alaska and the Tongass. And I should be sharing my screen now.
Yes, sir. I see your screen.
Okay, so a day-to-day look at keeping National Wilderness Rule protections on the Tongass. So before being the public lands coordinator for Alaska Conservation Foundation, I was the Tongass Forest Program Manager at Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. And so I spent the last 2 years pretty much designing a campaign that engaged Alaskans in advocating for keeping wilderness rule protections on the Tongass. So I worked to build people power to pressure the Dunleavy administration, the Alaska delegation, and the Trump administration. No easy task, considering they're not the most friendliest crowd. Additionally, at SEAC, I work to coordinate what's called the Tongass Coalition. And the Tongass Coalition is a group of 25 local, state, and national organizations who come together to collaborate and work to protect the Tongass. So a lot of folks don't realize behind the scenes, many environmental organizations are actually not competing, they're actually working in tandem and playing off one another's strengths. So the job, there's a lot that happens day to day, but really the most important thing is having good listening skills as an advocate. You have to understand and be willing to listen to community members and really get at the heart of what they really want and what change looks like for them on the ground. You need to understand the science and facts and really understand the sound arguments that you'll need to be able to make. You need to understand the policy mechanism. Who are the decision makers? And listen how they address the issue, so you can counter their arguments and counter their points. Then you do a lot of talking. Most of my time was spent in front of a screen, sending emails, talking on the phone, calendaring future meetings, and lots of collective planning using sticky notes and timelines. I mentioned understanding the decision-making process. Well, if you've taken Lang's environmental law course, you'll learn about the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And NEPA, you could take hundreds of classes on NEPA. It's a pretty convoluted process, but you need to at least have a basic understanding of that process. And because the Wilderness Rule is a federal rulemaking on federal lands, we focused on the National Environmental Policy Act process. This included the scoping period, the environmental impact statements, ensuring the public knew when and how to engage in the public commenting process. So really, we built the campaign around the NEPA process. And when you figure out, who are the decision makers, you need to start thinking about, well, who can influence them? We know Lisa Murkowski doesn't really care for the environmental community, but she does care deeply about the indigenous community here in Alaska. So who are the stakeholders those decision makers care about, and who are they more likely to listen to? That helps you identify in a campaign, all right, whose stories need to be heard. We know Senator Sullivan really cares about the economy. Well, the tourism economy in Southeast Alaska is critical, and tourists don't come here to see clear cuts. They come here to see an intact temperate rainforest. So we needed to make sure that the tourism community and their message was being, their stories were being told. And last, you need to think about, well, what will resonate with the public? And, the public in Alaska might be different than the lower 48. In Alaska, salmon is king. Alaskans live off of salmon. It's not only their ability to bring in home a paycheck, but it's also their ability to put food on the table. So in Alaska, we talk about salmon a lot. In the lower 48, you talk more about climate change. You talk about just the, how beautiful the Tongass is, and how rare this ecosystem truly is. Then, you have to think about, well, digital tools, all those online petitions you see, or the emails you get, or the text messages and calls you receive. Someone has to plan those. Someone has to build those. Someone has to coordinate those. Digital tools make it a lot easier for the public to be informed and take action. And modern day advocacy efforts really involve a lot of digital tools that make it easier for the organization's supporters and the general public to engage in the campaign. To gain the attention and keep the pressure on those decision makers, you have to make sure your issue is in the media. This includes the traditional media of TV, radio, and newspapers, and digital media, which means creating content for YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, etc. In my 20s, I was a lot better at creating a meme that got a lot more likes than I am in my 30s. But you still have to kind of learn those new ways and work hard to do it. If you have other staff that are working on the campaign, you have to delegate tasks to them. You have to hold them accountable. You have to have meaningful check-ins and ensure they feel supported. Nonprofit organizations rely a lot on individual donations or grants. So you have to do fundraising efforts, just like applying for grants for research. You apply for grants to do advocacy efforts often. So you also have to do fundraising. And last but not least, legal support. If the campaign comes down to legal action, you might not be a lawyer, but there are things lawyers need to support the lawsuit. So they might need, am I still here?
I hear you, Dan.
Okay, great, sorry. So you might, so if it comes down to legal action, you might need to give the lawyers the scientific evidence to bolster their arguments in court. Lawyers usually need locals to represent for the issue. So who's going to be impacted by the logging? And are those local people willing to act as what they call standing declarants for the lawsuit? So day-to-day can look really different, but generally there's a lot that goes into advocacy efforts and designing campaigns to ensure systems change. So the question is, well, what happened? Well, the Trump administration and the USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue decided to remove roadless rule protections from the Tongass. This is despite that 95% of more than 250,000 comments were in support of keeping roadless rule protections. And here in Alaska, the public meetings, there were public meetings all across the region. The public meetings were overwhelmingly in support. So Alaskans actually coming out and speaking in support of keeping protections. So they still decided to remove roadless rule protections. So today there are no roadless rule protections on the Tongass. Fortunately, the Biden administration has said that they plan to review the Trump administration's Alaska roadless rulemaking. So depending on when a rulemaking is made, future administrations have the ability to go back and review. And because this rulemaking happened at the end of the Trump administration, the Biden administration has time to review the rulemaking. There's also a pending lawsuit, and there is legislation in the House and Senate. So the roadless rule is a rule done by an agency. That's why it can be changed from administration to administration, or reviewed and adjusted from administration to administration. This legislation would codify and make the roadless rule protections law, and a law is much stronger than a rule. So that's a little bit about the Tongass and my work day to day to attempt to keep roadless rule protections on the Tongass. So I just want to end a little bit about considering a career in advocacy. So first and foremost, not just the advocacy is not just about the environment or climate. And even within the environmental advocacy world, you have a wide variety of groups that focus on a wide variety of environmental issues, and groups that take a wide variety of approaches on how they address environmental issues in different ways. But working in advocacy doesn't have to be environmentally focused. If you care about racial justice, if you care about fair elections, if you care about LGBTQ justice, if you care about democracy, like getting money out of our politics, if you care about gender equality, workers' rights, like unions, if you care about education policy, there's advocacy groups that are working to create system change on those issues. Just like there's a wide variety of advocacy groups doing work on a wide variety of issues, the politics of groups varies widely. So the spectrum of politics for environmental groups varies, and many groups are happy to coordinate with each other, kind of playing that good cop, bad cop mentality. For example, on the left, you have Greenpeace. Greenpeace is an organization that prides itself on a long history of civil disobedience, claims to have no permanent friends, and refuses to take money from corporations. Just right of center, you have Environmental Defense Fund, who partners with corporations, including occasionally in the past, even the fossil fuel industry, to influence policies. So depending on where you fall on the political spectrum, there's organizations that you can find that align with your political ideology. There's a wide variety of roles within advocacy groups. So I think a lot of people think, oh, you need an environmental studies degree, or you need to have a master's in environmental science to work at these organizations. That's not true. So some advocacy groups are small as a single paid staff person, and some have thousands of employees all over the world, like the World Wildlife Fund. So within advocacy groups, there's a variety of roles. I know the Nature Conservancy and Audubon Society hire GIS specialists all the time. I know groups hire scientists all the time. For example, there's an entire group dedicated to activating scientists. It's called the Union of Concerned Scientists. SEAC, for example, recently contracted a hydrologist to help us understand the impacts herbicide spraying that the Forest Service wanted to do would have on karst-based soils. Writers are needed for these organizations, software developers, many times I've mentioned digital tools, so software developers are needed, creatives, which includes videographers, photographers, graphic designers are needed, social media gurus, accountants, human resources. So the jobs are kind of endless at these organizations. And there's a lot of ways to access this work. You know, nonprofit organizations pay. This is something I struggled with my parents. My parents were like, well, are you going to be able to live and survive? That said, if making a ton of money is your #1 priority, I'd look elsewhere. The pay and benefits, the pay is good. I live a really quality lifestyle, and the benefits and pay do range depending on the size of the nonprofit. But most organizations do a really good job of taking care of their employees with the comfortable wage. Organizations often offer great benefits, including following the federal holiday schedule, 3 weeks paid vacation, matching 401ks, health, eye, dental insurance, all things you probably don't think about in college, but when you graduate, you'll think a lot about. Some groups even offer sabbaticals. For example, Greenpeace gave me a 3-month paid sabbatical after working there for 5 years. So if a sabbatical is the reason why you want to pursue being a professor, there are other sabbaticals out there. Folks in the nonprofit world work really hard. Work sometimes includes nights and weekends, and is often very responsive to what's happening politically. So a lot of groups are underfunded and have to make the dollar stretch. So often you're asked to learn new skills and do something you might not have been hired to do. So generally though, folks who work at advocacy organizations are there because they love the mission of the organization or are passionate about that issue. So it's often enjoyable, meaningful, and fulfilling work. So, you know, tips getting started, I'd really just educate yourself, find an issue you care about a lot, and look at what various organizations are doing on that issue. Read about political movements. Understand that Rosa Parks was trained at the Highlander Center, and her refusal to move to the back of the bus was part of a much larger plan. Volunteer with an organization or for political candidates. Many internships and fellowships exist, and I realize there's a level of privilege that comes with unpaid internships. but often these internships and fellowships are paid. For example, my organization, Alaska Conservation Foundation, sponsors the Ted Smith Conservation Internship Program, where we place 15 to 20 individuals with organizations across Alaska every summer. And those internships are stipend, and we often work to find housing for the interns. Working in advocacy and running campaigns is a skill that you can learn. And there are plenty of groups that offer trainings and scholarships to attend their training. So I've listed a couple here. Midwest Academy is a long-time advocacy training organization. Sunrise Movement, which is kind of the youth climate movement of today, they're constantly offering trainings. Momentum does a lot of training. Social Movement Technology does a lot of digital activism trainings. 350.org has an entire resource page that you can do self-education. Often local unions and political parties will often offer training. So they're out there if you're eager to learn. And honestly, I'll end with the best way to figure out how to do this work is to get experience doing it. Identify an issue on campus or in Slippery Rock that you want to change and create a campaign and work on a systems-based campaign and run a campaign. And yeah, so I'll stop there and answer any questions folks have.
All right, Dan, I want to give you a round of applause. I want to say a few things briefly before we go to the chat. And one of them is that you have become a very polished public speaker. So it's quite apparent to me that you are comfortable with your dialogue and your delivery to a group. Secondly, I want to mention that we do have cause that needs support at SRU, because in the last year, the administration removed the word environment from the name of our college. And I have to tell you that I felt very eviscerated, as if they took a dagger to me personally. So I've been a one-person campaign to get that word back into the name of the college, and nothing would thrill me more than if our students decided to engage and care about the fact that SRU has removed that from our architecture. That said, the chat box has had a lot of comments in it, so if you want to open up your chat box, I know from experience it's really hard to watch it while you're speaking and wrestling with technology. There's a lot of great stuff in there. I was curious if you have seen, since the roadless rule was removed, the bulldozers and the chainsaws show up and those entities start making hay and cutting as fast as they could. But we're going to start losing people to the approaching class hour. And so before we do that, I'm just going to go down to my reactions, and I'm going to give you a big red heart, Dan Cannon, because I love you and I love the things that you're doing. And now I'm going to stop talking and let you respond to the chat and answer questions.
Yeah, great. Just to answer Dr. B's question quickly, no, the bulldozers haven't really taken off. We were a lot more nervous if the Trump administration were to get reelected. But under the Biden administration, we're fairly confident that for now, bulldozers will stay out of wilderness areas. The Forest Service has identified 165,000 acres of old growth that they now want to cut now that wilderness rule protections are removed. So we're hoping to keep those protected under wilderness rule protections. Dr. Schiappa asked if I have been arrested. Yes, several times. But one thing I'll say about civil disobedience is that the point isn't always to be arrested. And in terms of our criminal justice system, we have to understand that as a white, straight male, it's a lot different to be arrested than a person of color or a queer person. So we really have to consider those, you have to consider kind of the privileges we hold when we take those actions. And I'll also add that a lot of planning goes into it. It's not just randomly, I decided to go and get arrested one day. There's a lot of legal briefings. There's a lot of discussion of the legal repercussions that could potentially happen. There's a plan where people often have suitcases full of money ready for bail. So oftentimes, when people see activists getting arrested, they think it's not well coordinated or planned, but there's a lot of thinking that goes into those. And if we can get away without being arrested, that's even better. So I was one of the activists that rappelled from the bridge in Portland, and I wasn't arrested. So I rappelled into a supporter's canoe and was taken to shore and got away scot-free, which was great. So if we can get away without being arrested, that's great. Do I advocate for other environmental, non-environmental causes? Absolutely. So, you know, the Black Lives Matter protest obviously is a big part of my life here locally, and then just educating myself as a white person to better understand the racial injustice that's happening in this country. You know, the conservation movement has a terrible history of colonialism and a long history of not respecting Indigenous sovereignty. So I do a lot of self-education there, and just ensuring Indigenous voices are front and center in our conservation efforts, and ensuring those conservation groups that are ran by Indigenous leaders are given the funds that they need to be given to do their good work. So absolutely. And yes, I absolutely ran into Bart Kohler. So Bart Kohler is a longtime SEACer. He was the executive director twice at SEAC, and he's still on the board today. He's a hell of a character. And there's probably no one that knows the Tongass better than Bart Kohler. So I learned a lot from him. I mentioned listening. I probably had many, many very long conversations with Bart, too many to count, just to really better understand the Tongass.
Yeah, well, say hi to Bart, because I worked with him at Greater Yellowstone Coalition, and then he went up to SEAC to run that, and I miss his hand drawings and things, and his guitar playing.
Yes, the guitar playing still is a thing. He played guitar at one of one of the last events I held before the pandemic for SEAC. He was there with his guitar. I will absolutely say hello for you, Lang.
Probably a beat up old Ovation guitar he still has.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I hit the questions in here. Did I miss any?
I just asked one other question. So what does the future hold for you? Are you going to stay put for a while? Is your plan to stay there, move on to something else?
Yeah, so, you know, activism has taken me a lot of places. I was in DC for 5 years. I followed love, and my wife went to graduate school at Yale. So I was in New Haven for 2 years. And then my wife got a job for the Forest Service up here, which brought us to Alaska. I love Alaska. I love Southeast. I didn't spend nearly enough time bragging about living in Alaska, but come here, visit. It's incredible. The plan, I think, for now is to do at least another 2 years here. My wife is a true New Englander. She's a diehard Vermonter. So I think she'll eventually want to get back to her family. And luckily, there's campaigns and organizations everywhere. So, you know, it's not always easy to find work, but there's always fights to be had no matter where you live.
Yeah, my daughter is in Vermont right now working for AmeriCorps, and yeah, it's a beautiful place. From what I haven't really been there, I haven't spent a lot of time there, but
yeah, on my sabbatical, I hiked the Long Trail. If anyone ever gets a chance to hike the Long Trail in Vermont, I strongly recommend it.
I have done it.
Yes, Dr. Snow.
I did it. Yeah, I did it before I went to Slippery Rock University. So now it's been more than 17 years ago. I did it the year before my daughter, the year before I went to Slippery Rock. So yeah,
Nice.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.